Good afternoon. My name is Kareem. I am the spokesperson for Alliance of Former Muslims, which is a support group for ex-Muslims living in Ireland. Today, I'm going to spend just a few minutes outlining the absurdity of so-called hate speech laws and how they endanger the very people whom they are supposedly designed to protect. I will explain how the damage caused by restricting freedom of speech, a fundamental human right, is far more detrimental to society than a handful of morons saying stupid shit. So, in 2018, by an overwhelming majority, the Irish people voted to repeal our blasphemy laws. This was a clear affirmation by the Irish people that freedom of speech is sacrosanct, that feeling offended can never be an adequate reason to curtail civil liberties. Indeed, a society that stifles speech for fear of causing offence is doomed to stagnation and decline, for as George Bernard Shaw said, all great truths begin as blasphemies. How absurd it is, then, that the Irish government now seeks to overturn that mandate in the name of hate speech. Some of you may be familiar with this book that I'm holding. This is the Quran, the holy book of Islam. For those of you who have read it, or even parts of it, I hardly need to state that this book is positively riddled with hateful sentiments. Let me read you just 3 examples. Number 1. In Surat al-Bayyinah, those who reject Islam are described as the worst of all creatures. Not rapists, not murderers, not pedophiles, no. Those who deny the claims of Muhammad, they are the worst of all creatures. Quote, those who disbelieve among the people of the book and the idolaters will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of created beings. Unquote. Example 2. In Surat al-Tawbah, Muslims are ordered to kill the polytheists wherever they can find them. Similarly, in Surat al-Anfal, Muslims are explicitly ordered to terrorize those who do not believe in Islam. Quote, when the sacred months have passed, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Take them captive, besiege them, and prepare for them every ambush. Against the unbelievers, make ready your strength to the utmost of your power, including steeds of war, to strike terror into the enemies of God. Unquote. Example 3. In Surat al-Ma'idah, Muslims are forbidden from taking Christians or Jews as their friends, for they are not to be trusted. In this same surah, the Quran goes on to describe Jewish people as apes and pigs. Quote, O you who believe, take not the Jews and the Christians for your friends and protectors. They are but friends and protectors to each other. The Jews are the ones whom Allah has cursed, who have incurred his wrath, some of whom were changed into apes and swine. Unquote. Now, you would think that with the Irish government being so concerned about hate speech, the Quran would be near the top of their priority list, right? No, of course it isn't, because they have a twisted definition of hate. When 2 men are murdered in Sligo as a direct result of what Islam teaches about gay people, namely, that they should be killed outright, the response of our political establishment is to accuse anyone who highlights this fact of spreading hate. That is the essential problem with hate speech laws, how we define hate. Those who seek to silence criticism of Islam, even as Irish citizens are murdered by its precepts, are these the people who we trust to define hate? Surely not, assuming we haven't completely lost our minds. For the likes of Helena McEntee, the charge of hate speech is merely a tool to silence inconvenient truths. The dangers of attempting to regulate hate speech are perfectly illustrated by the so-called hate crime bill, which actually states that if someone is merely perceived to be inciting hatred, this will be sufficient for the Gardaí to investigate them. So instead of the burden being on the accuser to prove their claims, the burden will be on the accused to disprove them. Needless to say, this is totalitarian. It is a complete reversal of the presumption of innocence, the very foundation of our justice system. It is a recipe for a society where people are afraid to say anything, lest they be perceived as offensive. This does nothing to protect minorities, and does everything to empower the fascists in our midst, including those Islamofascists who claim offence whenever the violent aspects of their religion are called out. As Muhammad himself said, "I have been made victorious with terror." This is what makes the government's rationale so absurd, for one of the main justifications for these laws is to protect minorities from abuse, that they are needed to counter a rise in hateful sentiment towards certain communities. Well, let me tell you something. Ex-Muslims are one of the most despised and persecuted minorities in the world. Indeed, there are at least 12 countries where I would be put to death for leaving Islam. And we are not calling for restrictions on speech, because we know all too well what this leads to. In Pakistan, those who criticize Islam are hunted down and killed by rabid lynch mobs. Why? For using hate speech against Islam. These mobs are emboldened by the fact that under Pakistani law, blasphemy is punishable by death. In the UK, outspoken apostates such as Nisar Hussain, my good friend, are savagely attacked and driven out of their homes for offending Muslim sensibilities. Once again, these fanatics are emboldened by the steady erosion of free speech in the UK. When a rabid mob succeeds in getting a schoolteacher fired for showing cartoons of Muhammad, the message is that Muslims can act with impunity. That is the logical endpoint of hate speech legislation, a society that is ruled by its most vicious elements. It doesn't stop the spread of fascism, it legitimizes the biggest fascists in our midst, the Islamofascists who want Ireland to be ruled under Sharia. And I should mention that Ali Salim, the spokesperson for the Clonskeagh Mosque, which is the biggest mosque in Ireland, has said that once there is a Muslim majority, Sharia should be the norm. When you equate speech with violence, you legitimize acts of terror. Just look at what happened to Salman Rushdie, stabbed 12 times for writing a book about Muhammad. And it's worth saying, by the way, that the portrayal of Muhammad in the satanic verses is far more flattering than his depiction in the Hadith or the Sirah. If Muslims were bothered to read their own books, they would find their prophet to be a warlord, a misogynist, a pedophile, and an anti-Semite. And yet, writing a work of fiction that barely touches upon this can get you killed. By making it easier for jihadists to claim hate speech against those who leave or criticize Islam, the hate crime bill risks lending credence to this kind of behavior. It risks turning Ireland into a ghetto for ex-Muslims, liberal Muslims, and anyone who believes in the idea of a free and democratic society. By now, we are very used to their tactics. Muslims constantly ridicule other religions. Indeed, it is the norm for Christians to be derided as polytheists or idolaters. But if a non-Muslim dares to respond in kind, they get called an Islamophobe. Well, if there is one message that I would like for you to take from this video, it is that Islamophobia is bullshit. It is pure Orwellian propaganda, designed to silence criticism of Islam by implying that any such criticism must, by definition, be phobic. It is a term invented by fascists and used by cowards to manipulate morons. Because what is a phobia? A phobia is an irrational fear or dislike of something. But what does Islam teach? Well, it calls for blasphemers and apostates to be executed. It calls upon Muslims to wage war against Christians until they either convert to Islam or agree to live in subjugation. It calls for gay people to be thrown off tall buildings and for adulterers to be stoned to death. It reduces women to the status of slaves, whose entire life is spent cooking, cleaning, and obliging their husbands whenever they want sex. It forbids music and alcohol entirely, and threatens you with hellfire for having doubts about any of this being God's will. Now let me ask you, is it irrational to oppose these ideas? Is it racist to oppose these ideas? No. On the contrary, if we believe in human rights, then we have a duty to oppose these ideas. We cannot allow Ireland to become a satellite state of Islam. We will not be silenced by jihadist appeasers in Dáil Éireann, and we will not be intimidated by their apologists on the far left, who are in bed with the Islamic imperialists of Hamas, murderous parasites who use the Palestinian people as cannon fodder in their jihad against the Jews. The claim that criticism of Islam is racist, propagated by our political establishment, is itself a deeply racist notion, for it implies that people from Muslim backgrounds have so little agency that Islam should be seen as their race. But of course, Islam is no such thing. Rather, it is an idea which increasing numbers of Muslims are rightfully abandoning. Ex-Muslims exist. There is a tsunami of apostasy sweeping the Islamic world, not least in countries like Iran, where over 60% of the population is under 30. This trend also extends to the West. In the United States, it is estimated that 1 in 4 people raised in a Muslim family go on to renounce Islam. Respect for people begins with telling them the truth. It is precisely because we respect Muslims as individuals that we tell them the truth about Islam. We want to help them overcome their fear of Allah and to break the chains of victimhood that Islam imposes. Hate speech laws go directly against this endeavor. Sheltering Muslims from criticism of their faith keeps them stuck in the 7th century. It drives them further into the arms of self-imposed community leaders who are often the most intolerant. Indeed, there is a reason why both Hussein Halawa and Umar al-Qadri called for the blasphemy laws to be maintained. Let me state that when these hate speech laws come into effect, we must do everything in our power to break them. We must challenge them so vigorously that they become unenforceable, because our very society is at stake. That is the question which these laws pose. What kind of society do we want to live in? Do we want a mature society where we can challenge one another and agree to disagree? Or do we want an infantile society where we run to the Gardaí whenever our feelings are hurt? I think most sane people would prefer the former. On the off chance that Helena McEntee sees this video, let me ask her, if these ideas that you are so concerned about are obviously harmful, don't you think that most Irish people would just ignore them? Where is the need to restrict speech? Unless you think that the Irish people are stupid. And that, I suspect, is the real motivation behind these laws. The misanthropic belief that most Irish people are unable to recognise harmful ideas, and thus must be prevented from hearing them. Indeed, it takes tremendous arrogance, tremendous narcissism to believe that you get to decide what other people can hear. Well, if there is one thing that the Irish people should never tolerate, it's being talked down to by those who presume to be their superiors. Those who possess such profound contempt for the masses are in no position to lecture others on hate. Contrary to what the Irish government seems to believe, criminalising speech does not create a more tolerant society. It only emboldens the most intolerant. In the UK, which, again, has broad restrictions on speech, the Home Office estimates that hate crimes have actually doubled since 2013. This makes sense, for it's absurd to think that by making it illegal to utter certain ideas, that those ideas just go away. They don't. They just get pushed underground, where they become more concentrated. With the hate crime bill, the Irish government is not just pursuing a fool's errand, they are attacking the very foundation of our liberal society. For freedom of speech is the mother of all other freedoms. Consider our democratic process. Without free speech, there can be no questioning of governments. Consider our legal system. Without free speech, we would not be able to defend ourselves against accusations. Consider the press. Without free speech, there can be no investigative journalism. In human history, any ideas that have been worth a damn have offended people. If we define hate speech as that which causes offence, then to regulate it is to undermine all manner of meaningful discourse. Ex-Muslims will never accept this Stalinist vision, and will be keeping a close eye on all those who are pushing for it. Defend free speech, resist Islamofascism, and remember that offence is what people take when they can't take an argument. Thank you.